In a workshop no bigger than a classroom, a young engineer named Frank Whittle tightened a bolt on a strange metal cylinder, and the air around him changed. When the switch was thrown, the machine didn't hum. It screamed. Flames erupted from its tail, and for the first time, air became fire. That sound, harsh, raw, unearthly, would echo across the century. It was the birth of the jet engine, and the beginning of humanity's race against itself. In the years that followed, that same invention would set the sky ablaze, powering bombers, fighters, and dreams. It would lift nations from rubble, collapse empires, and make the world smaller than anyone had imagined. From the tunnels of Nazi Germany to the laboratories of Cold War America, from secret projects to passenger jets, this engine, born of desperation, became the symbol of modern civilization. It connected continents. It built economies. It redefined what it meant to be fast. But its story isn't one of triumph alone. It's the story of how science, even when forged for war, can become a bridge between enemies. A reminder that innovation never asks why, only how. And that sometimes, the very tools of destruction can become the wings that carry us home. This is the story of the jet engine. The fire that changed the world. It was April 1937, and a thin, soft-spoken engineer named Frank Whittle stood beside a metal cylinder that looked more like a torpedo than an invention. The workshop smelled of oil, burnt rubber, and hope. He tightened a valve, glanced at his two nervous assistants, and nodded. Ready. When they flipped the switch, the machine coughed once, then screamed. The noise rattled every window in the shed. Flames shot from its tail, and the pressure gauges trembled. Within seconds, the roar rose to a pitch no piston engine could match, a new kind of sound, the voice of the future. Whittle smiled faintly. "Gentlemen," he said over the thunder, "we've done it. That's a jet." At that moment, the world had no idea it was watching the birth of modern flight. Before Whittle's invention, every aircraft on Earth relied on the same principle, the propeller. Blades carved through air, pulling planes forward, powered by piston engines, heavy, slow, and limited by the thin atmosphere above 25,000 feet. In the 1930s, even the fastest fighters could barely reach 400 miles per hour. Engineers believed that was the limit of flight, go faster, and propellers lost their grip on air. The sky itself, they thought, had a speed barrier. But Whittle refused to believe that. Frank Whittle was born in 1907 in Coventry, England, the son of a mechanic. From a young age, he loved engines and speed. He joined the Royal Air Force at 16 as an apprentice, too small to meet the height requirement, so he stretched himself taller by hanging from a beam for hours until he passed the medical exam. By his 20s, he was a pilot, engineer, and dreamer. In 1929, he submitted a thesis at RAF College Cranwell proposing a radical idea. Instead of using pistons and propellers, what if a plane carried a gas turbine that compressed air, mixed it with fuel, and ignited it to produce continuous thrust, a jet of flame, driving it forward? Most instructors dismissed it as fantasy. Too complex, they said. Too hot? Too dangerous. But Whittle patented the design in 1930 anyway. He called it a turbojet. For years, no one cared. The British Air Ministry politely filed his idea away, saying it was interesting but impractical. Funding was denied. Whittle left the Air Force for a while, working odd jobs, selling sketches to stay afloat. In Germany, however, engineers were reaching the same conclusion. Hans von Ohain, a young physicist, began designing his own jet engine around the same time. Unknown to each other, two men in rival nations were racing to break the same barrier. While Britain ignored Whittle, Germany gave Ohain a laboratory and a staff. By 1939, his jet prototype powered a small aircraft called the Heinkel He-178, the first jet to ever take flight. It flew for just 6 minutes, but it proved that the jet age had begun. When the British press eventually learned of it, they realized Whittle had designed the same thing years earlier, with no resources, no team, and no backing. The difference between genius and recognition was funding. Finally, in 1939, as Europe drifted into war, the RAF decided to take another look at Whittle's design. They assigned him a small workshop in Rugby, with minimal support and a handful of engineers. There, he formed Power Jets Limited, a company that would become the birthplace of Britain's jet revolution. On May 15, 1941, the first British jet aircraft, the Gloucester E.2839, lifted off from Cranwell Airfield. It climbed smoothly, without the vibration of pistons or the whine of propellers. It was fast, clean, and futuristic. One witness said, "It was like watching science fiction come alive." But Whittle didn't celebrate. He was exhausted, years of overwork, stress, and rejection had taken their toll. He collapsed shortly after the test flight and was hospitalized for nervous exhaustion. While he recovered, Britain finally understood what he had done. He had changed the sky forever. Across the Channel, Germany had also succeeded. Their engineers produced the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It was faster than anything in the air, nearly 540 miles per hour, and could outclimb Allied planes with ease. But the German advantage came too late. Fuel shortages, rushed production, and Hitler's obsession with using it as a bomber crippled its potential. Meanwhile, Allied factories, still dominated by piston engine production, watched closely. The war ended before the jet could decide the outcome, but not before it revealed something profound: the next war would belong to speed. When the Second World War ended, both Whittle and von Ohain were invited to share their findings. Despite being on opposite sides of the conflict, they became friends, even exchanging letters about their work. Whittle later said, "We both saw the same truth, that the sky was waiting for a new kind of engine. That engine, the turbojet, didn't just change military aviation. It built the modern world." By the 1950s, the same engines that once powered fighters now drove commercial airliners across oceans. The de Havilland Comet, Boeing 707, and Douglas DC-8 opened the jet age for civilians. Journeys that once took days now took hours. The world became smaller, faster, and more connected than ever before. The jet engine had started as a weapon of war. It ended as a symbol of peace, the technology that made global travel, trade, and communication possible. Frank Whittle lived to see his invention span the globe. He retired from the RAF as an Air Commodore and was knighted for his contribution to humanity. Hans von Ohain moved to the United States to work for NASA, designing propulsion systems for the space age. Two men, once on opposite sides, had built the same dream, a world powered by speed. The jet engine was more than machinery, it was proof that even in war, human ingenuity could reach for the stars. From the roar of a warplane to the calm hum of a passenger jet, the same invention carried us from destruction to discovery. If this story showed you how war shaped the modern world, leave a like, and for more true stories of science born from crisis, subscribe to Forgotten Science. Because sometimes, the engines built for war end up carrying us home. The year was 1944, and across the fields of Bavaria, entire factories had vanished, not destroyed, but hidden underground. In one of them, inside a vast limestone cavern lit by hanging lamps, the air was thick with the smell of oil and damp rock. German engineers worked in silence, their breath misting in the cold air, as the thunder of distant bombers echoed overhead. They were building something that, on paper, could have changed the war: the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. The machine was faster, sleeker, and deadlier than any aircraft ever seen. But inside those underground tunnels, the miracle of German engineering met the limits of German industry, and of ideology itself. In 1939, when the first prototype of the Me 262 took shape, German designers believed they had found the weapon that would restore their air dominance. The jet engine, a product of Hans von Ohain's early research, promised to propel their fighters 150 miles per hour faster than anything the Allies had. The Luftwaffe called it the Thunderbolt Killer, convinced it could sweep the skies clean. By 1942, prototypes were flying successfully. The aircraft climbed with power unseen before, leaving piston fighters behind like relics. Pilots described the sensation as being shot from a cannon. It seemed unstoppable. But perfection on paper meant little in a nation slowly running out of everything: fuel, metals, manpower, and time. As Allied bombing intensified, German industry retreated underground. The Messerschmitt Company established secret jet production sites in caves and tunnels carved into mountainsides. One of the largest, codenamed Walhall, sprawled beneath a Bavarian hill. The temperature inside was freezing. Water dripped from the ceiling onto unfinished jet fuselages. Workers, many of them forced laborers from occupied countries, assembled engines under flickering lights. Each day, Allied bombers reduced another city to rubble, yet inside these underground fortresses, engineers whispered about a machine that could turn it all around. They called it Hitler's miracle weapon. But miracles require order, and order was collapsing. The Me 262's heart was its Jumo 004 engine, a pioneering turbojet that produced roughly 1,980 pounds of thrust. It was brilliant but fragile. The Germans had invented jet power, but not the materials to sustain it. The engine's turbines operated at over 700 degrees Celsius, but Germany lacked high-temperature alloys containing nickel and chromium, metals that their war economy could no longer produce in quantity. As a result, turbine blades warped, cracked, and melted after just 10 to 25 hours of flight. Pilots described the jets as temperamental monsters. If they throttled too quickly, the engines could explode. American pilots later joked that the Me 262 could outrun anything, except its own maintenance crew. In 1943, as Me-262 prototypes neared readiness, Hitler intervened personally. Obsessed with offense rather than defense, he ordered the jet redesigned as a fighter bomber, capable of carrying bombs to attack ground targets instead of focusing purely on intercepting Allied bombers. His generals protested. The Me-262's true value was as an interceptor. But Hitler refused. "This is the Blitz bomber I have dreamed of," he said. "It will crush London." Reworking the aircraft delayed production by nearly a year Germany no longer had. By the time the first operational Me-262s entered combat in mid-1944, Allied forces had landed in Normandy, and the skies belonged to the Americans. The world's fastest fighter had arrived too late to change anything. Many of Germany's jet scientists were visionaries trapped in a collapsing empire. Hans von Ohain, who had once proudly built the world's first jet, now worked in obscurity, watching his technology devoured by war. He later reflected, "It was our tragedy that our best work was done for destruction. We built wings for peace, but they were used for killing." The underground factories employed tens of thousands of forced laborers. The conditions were brutal: little food, long hours, constant air raids above. The contrast between genius and cruelty defined the jet program, brilliant minds building the future inside a machine of oppression. By early 1945, Germany's fuel reserves had all but vanished. Jets sat on runways with empty tanks. Many were destroyed before ever flying. Allied bombers began targeting production tunnels directly, collapsing entire mountains onto the unfinished aircraft within. When US and British troops finally reached these sites, they found hundreds of half-built jets covered in dust, tools still on the benches, as if time itself had stopped mid-creation. They also found blueprints, detailed, meticulous, revolutionary. One American engineer reportedly said, "It's like we've stepped into the future." Those plans would soon cross the Atlantic and change aviation forever. When the war ended, Allied scientists scoured Germany for technology. The US Operation Lusty, Luftwaffe secret technology, recovered entire Me-262 aircraft, Jumo engines, and thousands of research documents. These discoveries directly shaped the next generation of American and British jet designs: the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, the Gloucester Meteor, and later, the Boeing 707. The Nazi dream of domination had died, but the science it unleashed survived. The Me-262 remains one of history's most haunting inventions, a glimpse of the future born in humanity's darkest hour. It proved that innovation and ideology can coexist, but never peacefully. Science doesn't choose sides, people do. And in those final German jet factories, beneath mountains of stone, the 20th century's next revolution was already humming quietly, waiting to take flight. Germany's jets never won their war, but they won the future of flight. From those hidden tunnels came the machines that would carry humanity across the world. This is the paradox of progress, born in destruction, perfected in peace. The war had ended, but the sky had only just opened. Across the shattered airfields of Germany, Allied engineers walked among the wreckage of Messerschmitts and Arados, taking notes, snapping photographs, and whispering the same thought over and over. We're decades behind, and yet, this is ours now. The jet engine, once a German and British experiment, had become the prize of peace. The world's new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, would turn it into the most important weapon of the Cold War: speed. In 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, Allied intelligence teams launched Operation Lusty, a massive sweep to capture German aviation technology. In underground factories and secret research hangars, they found things that seemed almost science fiction. Jet-powered bombers half-complete on assembly lines. Prototype flying wings. Experimental engines that promised supersonic flight. Every nation wanted them. The Americans shipped entire aircraft by the hundreds across the Atlantic, Me-262s, R-234 jet bombers, and engines like the Jumo 004 and BMW 003. The British took their share too, studying every bolt and turbine blade. The Soviets, moving even faster, dismantled entire German laboratories in the east and sent both scientists and machines to Moscow. What had been Hitler's secret arsenal was now the foundation of the post-war world. In America, General Henry Hap Arnold, head of the U.S. Army Air Forces, gave a simple order: whatever they had, we build better. Within a year, American factories that once produced bombers were retooled to design jet fighters. By 1946, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star became the first U.S. operational jet, heavily influenced by the Me-262's shape but powered by British-style Whittle engines. In Britain, Frank Whittle's work finally received the investment it had long deserved. His power jet's design evolved into the Rolls-Royce Derwent and Nene, engines so reliable that they would become the world standard for the next decade. And far to the east, the Soviets were doing the same, but faster. When Soviet troops reached German airfields, they seized not just equipment but people. Engineers like Fritz Bade and Helmut Schelp were transported to the USSR to work under supervision. At the same time, Stalin took a shortcut. He ordered Rolls-Royce Nene jet engines directly from Britain in 1946, under the pretense of civil research. The British government, hoping to maintain goodwill, approved the sale. Within months, Soviet engineers had reverse-engineered the Nene, creating the Klimov VK-1, the engine that powered the MiG-15, the jet that would soon challenge American air power in Korea. Whittle, upon hearing this years later, simply said, "Well, I suppose imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." By the early 1950s, the world's skies had changed forever. Propellers disappeared. The roar of jets became the new sound of power. In 1950, the Korean War became the first true jet versus jet conflict in history. American F-86 Sabres, powered by Whittle-derived engines, clashed with Soviet MiG-15s over the Yalu River. Both aircraft owed their existence to the same wartime science, born in Oxford and Piedmont, perfected in Detroit and Moscow. Every dogfight was a mirror image of shared genius divided by ideology. Pilots described the battles as unlike anything before, speeds over 600 miles per hour, dogfights measured in seconds. A single turn could decide life or death. The jet had not just redefined flight, it had redefined reaction time itself. But the hunger for speed didn't stop there. If jet power could break 600 miles per hour, why not 700? Why not the speed of sound? That question drove a new kind of research, one no longer about war, but about limits. In 1947, the United States achieved the impossible. Test pilot Chuck Yeager, flying the experimental Bell X-1, became the first human to break the sound barrier, Mach 1.06, or 1,127 km per hour, powered by rocket thrust and guided by lessons learned from wartime jet aerodynamics. The Germans had theorized it. The British had pioneered it. The Americans did it. Human flight had entered its next phase, supersonic. Every jet that followed, from the F-100 Super Sabre to the MiG-21, carried the DNA of those early war engines. But beyond military pride, another frontier loomed: space. The same principles that made turbojets and rockets cousins, combustion, thrust, and high-temperature metallurgy, now pointed upward. Engineers who once designed fighters began designing rockets. Hans von Ohain worked on high-altitude propulsion in the US. German rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, once a rival in Hitler's weapons program, now led NASA's Saturn V project. The Cold War jet race had quietly become the space race. But progress always has a price. The jet age, while shrinking the world, brought new dangers: sonic booms over cities, crashes from speeds too fast for human reflexes, and a new kind of warfare that could reach anywhere in minutes. For every breakthrough, there was anxiety. If the propeller had represented freedom, the jet represented power, and power always comes with fear. By the 1960s, passenger jets like the Boeing 707 and the de Havilland Comet turned former weapons into tools of peace. The same engines that once carried bombs now carried families. Humanity had, for once, turned science away from destruction, but the race for speed never truly stopped. The Cold War jet race produced the most rapid technological leap in aviation history. In just 20 years, humanity went from propeller planes to supersonic jets and orbital spacecraft. All of it, every turbine, every afterburner, every sonic crack in the sky, traced back to that moment when a young man named Frank Whittle tightened a bolt in a noisy shed in 1937 and proved that fire could fly. The jet engine began as a dream of victory, and became the engine of connection. From the ashes of war rose the sound of progress. If you believe the inventions born in crisis still shape our world today, leave a like, and for more stories of science that survived its creators, subscribe to Forgotten Science. Because every leap forward begins with a spark, even one lit in the darkest of times. When the war ended in 1945, much of the world looked to the ground, to rebuild what had been destroyed. But a few men were already looking upward. They knew that the war's final invention, the jet engine, had changed more than combat. It had changed what it meant to be powerful. The skies that once belonged to propellers were now claimed by fire and thrust. And in the silence that followed the guns, a new war began, a war for speed. The surrender of Nazi Germany was more than a military victory. It was the greatest scientific heist in history. Across ruined hangars, tunnels, and bombed-out factories, Allied soldiers found machines that seemed to have fallen from the future. Sleek, swept-wing aircraft unlike anything they had ever seen. Some were complete, others were just blueprints, delicate, ash-covered pages scattered on concrete floors. In one underground workshop in Bavaria, British officers found a half-finished aircraft that looked almost alien, a smooth metal body, no propellers, twin jet nacelles beneath its wings. The name stenciled on its side was Mi-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. To the engineers who saw it, it was a revelation. The war had ended before the jet could decide its outcome, but its arrival had changed everything. The next superpower wouldn't just have the best army. It would need the fastest sky. The Americans moved quickly. Within days of Germany's surrender, US intelligence officers began Operation Lusty, a mission to seize every fragment of German aviation research they could find. They didn't just take aircraft. They took scientists, engines, and ideas. Entire workshops were dismantled, packed into wooden crates, and flown across the Atlantic. At the Wright Field Air Base in Ohio, hangars filled with German jets, turbojets, and rocket prototypes. Some still carried Luftwaffe markings. American engineers studied them obsessively. They dismantled the Jumo 004 engines piece by piece, examining how German metallurgy had survived temperatures no Allied engine could withstand. They tested swept-wing designs that reduced drag at high speeds, an innovation that would soon define modern flight. For many, it was a sobering realization: while the Allies had won the war, they had nearly lost the future. The Americans had the factories, but the Germans had the head start. And somewhere far to the east, the Soviets were learning the same lesson. The Soviet Union had endured unimaginable loss, cities reduced to ash, millions dead. But amid that destruction, Joseph Stalin saw opportunity. He knew that to match the West, the USSR would need something new, machines that could outfly and outfight anything in the capitalist world. His forces swept into eastern Germany before the Americans could, confiscating not only aircraft but the scientists who built them. German engineers were quietly invited to work in Soviet laboratories. Entire design bureaus, including jet experts from Junkers and BMW, were relocated to Moscow and Kazan. They worked under watch, often with their families kept as leverage. But the work they did there changed history. Within 5 years, the Soviets had developed their own high-thrust jet engines, direct descendants of the Mi-262's turbines. The Soviet state called it progress. In truth, it was inheritance. Back in England, the man who had started it all, Frank Whittle, watched the world race past him. His invention, once dismissed as a curiosity, was now shaping the fate of empires. The British government finally realized its potential, funding a new generation of engines at Rolls-Royce. The Derwent and Nene models were small miracles of engineering, simpler, more durable, and powerful enough to lift the next generation of aircraft to the edge of the stratosphere. But in 1946, in a moment that would haunt British history, those same engines were sold, legally, to the Soviet Union. The transaction was meant to build trust. Instead, it gave the USSR the blueprint for its most feared weapon, the MiG-15. In the late 1940s, two nations faced each other across divided skies. The United States, now armed with the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, and later the F-86 Sabre, saw itself as the guardian of free flight. The Soviet Union, flying its new MiG-15s, saw itself as proof that socialism could master technology as well as the West. Both aircraft were built from the same DNA, the discoveries of war. Both carried the same ghost, the jet engine. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the world watched the first jet versus jet battles in history. In the freezing skies over the Yalu River, American and Soviet-built fighters clashed at speeds never before seen in combat. Dogfights that once lasted minutes now ended in seconds. Pilots described them as blurs of silver and flame. At over 600 miles per hour, reaction time had become a weapon. Those who had fought in World War II marveled, and shuddered. In barely 5 years, the sky had changed beyond recognition. The jet engine had done more than make flight faster, it had rewritten physics. Engineers began to realize that at certain speeds, the air itself became an enemy. Aircraft approaching the speed of sound encountered turbulence so violent that wings could shatter and control surfaces froze. They called it compressibility. For years, it was believed to be unbreakable, the sound barrier. But in 1947, that barrier broke. Test pilot Chuck Yeager, flying the bright orange Bell X-1, pierced Mach 1 at 45,000 feet. The first sonic boom echoed across the Mojave Desert, marking a new frontier for humanity. It was not powered by propellers, or even faith, but by the legacy of war. The aerodynamics of the Mi-262, the metallurgy of the Jumo 004, the combustion principles of Whittle's turbojet, all of it had converged here. The speed that once belonged to destruction now belonged to discovery. In the early 1950s, two names came to define the jet age. Clarence Kelly Johnson in the United States, and Artem Mikoyan in the Soviet Union. Johnson's Skunk Works at Lockheed built aircraft that seemed impossible, the U-2, the State Route 71 Blackbird, machines that could soar higher and faster than any before them. Mikoyan's Design Bureau, working under constant political pressure, produced the MiG series, the fighters that dominated Soviet airspace for decades. Each side pushed the other forward, not through diplomacy, but through fear. Every advance demanded a response. Every jet launched was a statement, "We are not behind." In laboratories across the world, engineers began to wonder if there was any limit left to conquer. The jet engine's principle was simple: compress air, mix it with fuel, ignite, and push. But there was one place where air no longer existed: space. Out of that realization came the rocket. The technology of thrust, perfected in the jet age, now reached beyond the sky. By the late 1950s, both superpowers had turned their jet scientists into rocket pioneers. The same industrial minds that had once forged jet turbines now built missile engines and launch vehicles. The Cold War had taken flight, vertically. And in 1961, when Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, he did so in a capsule driven by the same principle that powered Whittle's first jet: fire pushing against air, or in this case, against nothing at all. The jet age had delivered its promise, and its warning. It had made the world smaller, travel faster, and war more terrifying than ever before. Nations could now cross oceans in hours. Bombers could reach continents. Missiles could erase cities. The technology that united the world had also armed it. The same factories that built passenger jets built bombers. The same engines that lifted families into the sky carried nuclear warheads over the poles. The dream of speed had become a paradox: the faster humanity moved, the more fragile peace became. Yet, out of fear came connection. Commercial aviation, born from the same jet principles, transformed the human experience. Airlines like Pan American and BOAC launched fleets of Boeing 707s and de Havilland Comets, turning intercontinental travel from an adventure into an expectation. Within a single generation, the world went from isolation to global interdependence. The engine once built for war now carried businessmen, scientists, and families across the sky. The same sound that once meant bombing raids, that deep, rising jet roar, had become the sound of progress. It was, in its own way, a kind of peace. By the 1960s, the jet had done what no weapon ever could: it united enemies in awe. Soviet and American pilots would later admit, in private, that they respected each other's machines more than their governments. The technology born in chaos had outlived ideology. The Cold War would rage on for decades, through proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, and political brinkmanship, but one truth remained unshaken: the world would never again be slow. The jet engine had given humanity its wings. It had also given it a mirror. In every contrail across the sky was the reflection of what we could create, and what we could destroy. The race for speed began with war, but it ended with us touching the stars. If this story showed you how crisis created progress, leave a like, and for more true stories of science born from humanity's darkest hours, subscribe to Forgotten Science. Because behind every invention that changed the world, there's always a moment of desperation that made it possible. When the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared, the jet engine, born in secrecy, tested in fear, stood at the threshold of a new era. Its first purpose had been destruction, its first flights drenched in the noise of war. But now, in the fragile calm that followed, humanity began to wonder. Could this same machine carry people, not bombs? Could the engine of war become the engine of the world? The answer would come not from generals, but from dreamers, engineers and entrepreneurs who saw in the roar of the jet not power, but possibility. The late 1940s were years of exhaustion. Cities rebuilt themselves brick by brick. Nations buried their dead. And yet, amid the rubble, airports were expanding, runways lengthening, and the sky itself was being repaved for peace. In London, the engineers of de Havilland, the same company that had built wooden bombers during the war, began sketching a vision so bold it bordered on madness. A civilian jetliner. Not a prototype, not a fighter, but a passenger aircraft that could cross oceans without propellers. They called it the Comet. When the de Havilland Comet made its first flight in 1949, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Its 4 turbojet engines left no vibration, no propeller blur, only smooth, endless thrust. For the first time in history, passengers could rise above the weather, flying in silence at 500 miles per hour. Newspapers called it the miracle of the air. Flight attendants wore bright uniforms, and the cabin, with its oval windows and polished metal, felt like a vision of the future. Britain had created not just a plane, but a new idea of civilization. A world connected by speed. But every revolution carries risk. In 1953, one of the early comets vanished over the Mediterranean. Then another. And another. At first, investigators blamed sabotage or weather. But as wreckage was recovered, the truth emerged, a truth that would redefine aerospace engineering forever. The Comet's jet engines pushed it faster and higher than any airliner before. But the constant pressurization at high altitude, stretching and compressing the fuselage thousands of times, caused microscopic cracks around its square windows. After hundreds of flights, those cracks joined together, tearing the aircraft apart in midair. The invention that had promised connection had become a warning. Yet from tragedy came knowledge. Engineers around the world studied the failures, learned about metal fatigue, and rewrote the laws of aircraft design. And from that loss rose the jet that would change not just travel, but the shape of the century. In Seattle, a small company named Boeing had spent the war building bombers, massive B-17s and B-29s that darkened the skies over Europe and Japan. After 1945, their factories fell silent. The military contracts were gone, and no one was quite sure what peace would look like. But one engineer, William Allen, Boeing's president, had a vision. He believed the company could adapt its wartime experience to build something no one else dared attempt, a commercial jet airliner that could cross the Atlantic non-stop. It was a staggering gamble. The prototype alone would cost $16 million, half of Boeing's entire value at the time. But Allen pushed forward, betting the company's future on speed. In 1954, the prototype took flight, a sleek silver aircraft known as the Boeing 367-80, or -80. Its performance stunned the world. Within 5 years, it evolved into the Boeing 707, the plane that would define the jet age. By 1958, passengers boarded the first 707 flights from New York to Paris, cutting the journey from 14 hours to 7. For the first time, time itself seemed to shrink. Continents that had once been weeks apart were now separated by a single night's sleep. The experience of flight changed, too. Air travel, once the domain of soldiers and explorers, became an experience for civilians. Cabins filled with families, business travelers, and students chasing opportunity. Every takeoff carried not fear, but fascination. The roar of jet engines, once a sound of sirens and death, became the music of progress. Soon, other nations followed. France built the Caravelle, elegant and quiet. The Soviet Union introduced the Tu-104, the first Eastern Bloc passenger jet. Britain returned with the improved Comet 4, and Douglas introduced the DC-8, Boeing's American rival. For the first time in human history, the world shared the same sky, not as battlefields, but as highways. At airports from Tokyo to New York, strangers boarded aircraft made of the same metal, powered by the same principle, a jet engine conceived in war and reborn for peace. Airlines began using phrases once reserved for miracles. Non-stop, overnight, transatlantic. And for millions of ordinary people, the planet itself seemed to shrink into something they could finally hold. The jet didn't just carry people, it carried prosperity. It redefined trade, tourism, and time itself. Cities once considered remote became global centers. London, New York, Tokyo, and Los Angeles grew into the first truly interconnected hubs of the modern age. Airports became gateways to the new economy, the visible engines of globalization. In just a decade, the jet had done for geography what the printing press had done for knowledge. It erased distance. But the military had not let go of its creation. Even as airlines filled the skies with civilians, nations filled hangars with bombers. The same turbines that powered the Boeing 707 also powered the B-52 Stratofortress, capable of carrying nuclear weapons across continents. In the Cold War balance, the jet was both promise and threat, a symbol of civilization and annihilation in the same breath. Every contrail that streaked across the blue sky was a paradox. A white scar that represented both unity and fear. The jet age changed more than technology. It changed humanity's sense of scale. For thousands of years, distance had defined civilization. Empires grew where roads reached, cultures diverged because oceans divided. But the jet erased that separation. It turned the map into a network, the globe into a neighborhood. And in doing so, it transformed not just economies, but identities. A child born in the 1950s would grow up in a world where the word abroad no longer meant unreachable. For the first time, human beings could circle their planet in a single day. It was a miracle built on metal, mathematics, and the mistakes of war. By the 1960s, photographs of sleek jets filled the covers of magazines. Jet engines became icons of modernity, the language of power, style, and aspiration. They were the background hum of the 20th century, the sound of business, diplomacy, migration, and adventure. To fly was no longer to escape, it was to exist in the rhythm of the modern world. In just 20 years, humanity had gone from wooden biplanes to supersonic flight. From trenches to terminals. From fear to fascination. The same invention that had carried bombs over Berlin now carried students to universities, artists to galleries, and families to reunions. What began in war had become the pulse of civilization. But the jet engine's triumph was not without cost. It made the world faster, but also more fragile. It connected nations, but tied their fates together in ways no one had foreseen. The same industry that had once rescued humanity from isolation now faced questions of pollution, fuel, and sustainability. Every progress, it seemed, carried a shadow. And yet, for all its contradictions, the jet engine remains one of humanity's purest triumphs, proof that even inventions born in chaos can become instruments of unity. From the roar of the Me-262 to the whisper of a Boeing Dreamliner, every flight traces its lineage back to the same spark. A single idea, that fire and air, combined with courage, could lift us above the world we built. The jet engine began in war but gave us peace. It was proof that human innovation can rise above human destruction. And though it was born in the darkest decade of the 20th century, it became the light that connected them all. If you believe the science born in crisis still shapes your life today, leave a like. For more true stories of the inventions that made our modern world possible, subscribe to Forgotten Science. Because behind every leap of progress, there's always the shadow of survival. By the 1960s, the sky no longer seemed like a frontier. It was an achievement, conquered, mapped, and measured. The jet engine had turned flight into a routine, connecting continents in hours and bringing nations face to face. But progress has a way of asking, what's next? If the jet had shrunk the world, then someone, somewhere, was already trying to erase it entirely. The next dream was not speed itself. It was supersonic speed, to fly faster than sound, higher than storms, and to make the Earth itself seem small enough to circle before sunset. It was a dream of elegance, prestige, and pride, and for a brief, dazzling moment, it came true. The idea began as a whisper across the Atlantic, a challenge between two allies. In 1956, British and French engineers started to imagine an aircraft that could cruise at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. It would soar at 60,000 feet, where the sky turned dark and the curvature of the Earth was visible from the window. At that altitude, the sun rose twice on a single flight. The British called their prototype the BAC-223, the French their Sud Aviation Super Caravelle. But both nations faced the same reality: neither could afford the cost alone. So, in 1962, they signed a treaty, one of the first major European collaborations in aviation. The name would reflect that unity, Concorde, from the French word for harmony. It would become the most beautiful aircraft ever built. And, perhaps, the most doomed. Concorde was unlike any machine before it. Its slender, swept-back delta wings and needle-like nose gave it the look of a predator and the grace of a bird. Its engines, the Rolls-Royce Snecma Olympus 593, were descendants of the same jet designs that had powered bombers 2 decades earlier. But now, they were refined to perfection, for engines producing 38,000 pounds of thrust each, pushing the aircraft through the sky at over 1,350 miles per hour. To survive the heat of friction at Mach 2, the entire airframe was built from a nickel-aluminum alloy. At cruise, the metal skin expanded by up to 10 inches. Each flight was a delicate balance between heat, drag, and lift, a dance of physics at the edge of possibility. To those who flew her, Concorde was not just a plane. It was a living thing. When Concorde took to the skies for the first time in March 1969, it was more than an engineering milestone, it was a statement. The same year that humans walked on the moon, they also broke the limits of Earth's atmosphere in luxury. From the runways of Paris and London, Concorde leapt into the stratosphere like a silver arrow. Inside, passengers sipped champagne while traveling at twice the speed of sound. A flight from London to New York took just 3 hours and 30 minutes, fast enough to leave after lunch and arrive before it. It was the sound of a century believing in itself, the hum of optimism wrapped in titanium and dreams. But beneath the triumph, the economics were already unraveling. Concorde was a masterpiece, and like all masterpieces, it was expensive. Each aircraft cost over $100 million to produce, and its engines burned fuel at a rate no airline could love. The sonic boom it produced when breaking the sound barrier over land made supersonic flight politically impossible in most countries. Only oceanic routes were permitted, limiting its range and profit. Then came competition. Across the Atlantic, the United States had begun its own supersonic project, the Boeing 2707, a massive, swing-wing aircraft meant to carry 300 passengers at Mach 3. But by 1971, public outrage over cost and environmental impact killed the project. Concorde, once a symbol of unity, became a lonely survivor of a dream too expensive for the real world. By the late 1970s, only 2 airlines flew Concorde, British Airways and Air France. Tickets cost the equivalent of several $1,000s, a small fortune even for business travelers. But those who could afford it called it the closest thing to time travel. Passengers included diplomats, rock stars, presidents, and movie icons. David Bowie flew it. Phil Collins once used Concorde to perform at 2 Live Aid concerts on the same day, one in London, one in Philadelphia. Flying Concorde was not just transportation, it was status. Every takeoff was a headline. Every landing was applause. Yet for all its glamour, the economics never made sense. Each flight earned prestige, not profit. Each mile flown cost more in fuel than it brought in revenue. The world adored Concorde, but it couldn't afford it. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 departed from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport bound for New York. Moments after takeoff, a strip of metal on the runway punctured a tire, sending debris into the fuel tank. A fire erupted, the left engine failed, and the plane never gained altitude. It crashed into a hotel near Gonesse, killing all 109 aboard and 4 on the ground. The images shocked the world. For a generation, Concorde had symbolized invincibility, the proof that human mastery of flight was absolute. In one afternoon, that illusion vanished. The investigation cleared Concorde of design failure, the cause was a freak accident. But the spell was broken. In 2003, both British Airways and Air France retired their fleets. The final flight circled cities that had once watched the future rise from their runways. People wept as the white silhouettes vanished into history. For the first time in decades, humanity had slowed down, willingly. Concorde had lasted only 27 years in service, yet it left an imprint deeper than any other aircraft. It proved that humans could conquer not only the sky, but time itself, if only briefly. It inspired generations of engineers to dream of faster, cleaner, quieter flight. And even in its failure, it forced the world to face a truth: progress without balance is unsustainable. Supersonic flight was not the end of an age, it was a warning to the next one. Today, new companies chase that dream again, developing carbon-neutral, noise-reduced jets that promise to bring back Mach 2 travel. But none have yet captured the romance, or the risk, of that silver dart called Concorde. Its shadow still lingers in every ambitious invention. The story of the jet engine began in war and ended in wonder. From Frank Whittle's workshop to the skies of the Cold War, from bombers to Boeing, from Me-262s to Concorde, it is the story of humanity itself, brilliant, reckless, and unstoppable. Each stage of its journey tells the same story in a different language, a story of transformation. From destruction to connection. From fire to flight. From survival to beauty. The jet engine did not just change transportation. It changed time. It taught humanity that distance is no longer measured in miles, but in moments. That progress cannot be reversed, only redirected. And that even inventions born for war can become symbols of peace. Concorde flew faster than sound, but what it really conquered was fear. If this story made you see progress in a new light, leave a like, and for more stories of how crisis built the modern world, subscribe to Forgotten Science. Because every invention that lifted us higher, began in the ashes of something that tried to pull us down. In the end, it wasn't power that defined the jet engine. It was transformation. A machine born to destroy became the machine that connected the world. From Whittle's trembling prototype to the silver streak of Concorde, every flame, every roar, every contrail told the same story, that humanity's greatest inventions are never just about machines. They're about redemption. The same turbines that once carried bombs now carry families. The same noise that once terrified cities now hums us gently across oceans. The jet engine began in fear. But it ended in unity. It turned war into wonder. Distance into minutes. Enemies into neighbors. And it left us with a lesson, that even the darkest ambitions can ignite the brightest futures, if we choose what to build next. The sky was never the limit. It was the beginning. If this story showed you how crisis shaped the modern world, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. Because behind every great invention, there's a moment when humanity had to choose destruction or discovery.